Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's 4 p.m. in Singapore and 3 p.m. in Laos PDR on the 4th of August, 2021. It's with great pleasure to welcome all of you to our fourth and final webinar in the series on adolescent health and development, co-organized by the SingHealth Duke-NUS Global Health Institute and the United Nations Population Fund in Laos PDR. My name is Allard de Smalen, and I'm a research associate at SDGHI and the Center of Regulatory Excellence. Today, we are gathered for the webinar on the impact of poverty and extreme events on adolescents, where our speakers will be talking about health issues among adolescents related to trafficking, conflicts, and violence in the Southeast Asian region. Now, a few quick housekeeping rules before we move ahead. This webinar is being recorded, so please do keep yourselves on mute at all times and feel free to send your questions using the Q&A tab below. The questions will be addressed at the end of the session after the moderated panel discussion. Before we find out more about the speakers today, I would like to introduce Dr. Tej Ram Jat, who will be moderating today's webinar. Dr. Jat is the Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health Program Specialist and the team lead for the youth team at UNFPA Laos PDR since 2018, where he's leading programs on empowerment of adolescents through the comprehensive NOI ecosystem approach. Prior to his current role, he led large-scale projects on adolescent health and development, as well as public health capacity building in India and Myanmar for over 16 years. He received his PhD in public health from Umeå University in Sweden and a master's degree in health policy planning and financing from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Dr. Jat, thank you for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Allard. Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome once again to this fourth and final webinar of this regional series. This webinar will focus on the impact of poverty and extreme events on adolescent health. The global research evidence shows that the poverty and extreme events have severe negative consequences on adolescents. They significantly increase the risk of trafficking, exploitation, and violence against adolescents, especially adolescent girls and young women, violating their sexual and reproductive health and human rights. It results into negative impact on their health and overall development. These issues have become very important and urgent to address in the light of the recent COVID-19 crisis. We have three speakers with us today. They will provide a background on the regional trends and impact of financial deprivation and other severe situations on adolescents, such as trafficking, conflicts, and violence. They will also share country examples from Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar to highlight the issues and share the ongoing responses with systems approach. At the end of this webinar, we will also have a panel discussion and some time for questions and answers. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat box and we will try to address them based on the availability of the time. As this is the last webinar of this series, we will also have closing remarks from Ms. Mariam Khan, UNFPA representative Laos PDR, and Ms. Amina Mahmood, Deputy Director of SDGHI. With this background, I would like to invite our first speaker, Ms. Mary Nodzenski. She is a PhD candidate at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Her thesis focuses on the drivers of poor mental health in young male children and adolescents in post-trafficking settings in the Greater Mekong sub-region. Prior to joining the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, she conducted research on regional health governance in ASEAN and also collaborated on several projects related to migrant workers' health. She also conducted a comparative study on social and economic approaches to migrants' health in selected Asian and European cities. Mary holds a BA in political science and an MA in international relations from University of Kent, UK, and she is currently based in Hong Kong, SAR. She will present the regional trends and the impact of trafficking among adolescents, and will also discuss the relation of trafficking to poverty within the poverty cycle. Over to you, Mary. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tej, for this introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's move on to the next slide. For those who are not very familiar with human trafficking, it's basically defined on the basis of three elements, which are the act of recruiting or receiving individuals for the purpose of exploitation through the use of coercive and deceptive practices. Now, in the case of child trafficking, that element of means is not needed, as we consider that a child cannot give consent. Therefore, in this instance, the purpose of exploitation is very central to determining whether a child has been trafficked or not. Moving on, human trafficking, next slide, please, Meryl. Thank you. So human trafficking is broadly an umbrella term which refers to two main types of trafficking: forced labor, which is the most prevalent form of trafficking globally, and sex trafficking. These two forms are not mutually exclusive. A lot of people suffer from both types of exploitation at the same time. And young people tend to be recruited into what we call the worst forms of child labor, or into criminal activities, domestic servitude, forced marriage, or child exploitation. Now, moving on to prevalence of modern slavery, it's very difficult to estimate the true prevalence of human trafficking globally in the region, and the figures you can see online in reports can really vary. Nevertheless, what we can estimate is that the Asia-Pacific region accounted for almost 2/3 of all victims globally, with about 25 million victims of modern slavery on any given day in the region. That was in 2016, which is one of the latest data. And up to 1/3 of those trafficking victims could be children. What's also very important to note is that the very large majority of victims trafficked in the region are trafficked within the region. And this is due to important disparities in economic development, employment, education opportunities in the region that tend to drive irregular migration, but also human trafficking. Moving on, experiences of trafficking, they can be very different depending on whether you're an adult, a child, a woman, a man on the sector of exploitation. But really a common feature of all experiences of trafficking is a number of health risks to which victims are exposed. Trafficking is often characterized by different types of abuse and violence, physical, sexual, psychological abuse, but also by somehow less direct health risks that arise from a range of restrictions and insecurities. Now, moving on, these health risks, they result in a range of health consequences, which I have chosen to represent in this manner to highlight that they often intertwine with psychological consequences. Just to give you a quick example, from a sample of children that were exploited in the region, a study found that severe physical violence was associated with depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. Next slide, please. So are these health consequences really more severe for children and adolescents? Well, limited but existing literature does point to the higher risk of long-term harm from trafficking for young people because they're still in development. It has the potential to cause severe cognitive, emotional development delays, sometimes even regression, as well as a host of behavioral issues. And all these damaging consequences are also very likely to continue into adult life. Now, in the case of children, what's very problematic is that they have difficulties coping with an accumulation of risk factors. But what you will see in the rest of the presentation is that this accumulation of risk factors is very characteristic of the trafficking experience, and therefore it's very damaging to children. So moving on to the next slide. Yes, I'd like to show you some examples from the Mekong region itself. So for the rest of the presentation, I will refer to data collected in the region through a study called STEAM, which was conducted between 2010 and 2013. It sampled a total of 1,102 individuals, which were aged 10 years old or more. And the survey collected a range of information on pre-trafficking situations, experiences of trafficking, health outcomes, and they also asked participants to share their concerns, their fears, and their hopes for the future. If you'd like to know more about the STEAM study, the methodology, and the findings, I invite you to consult the report on the IOM's website. Moving on, apologies for this slide, which is a bit dense. This is all data that has been published, again, can be retrieved online. I just want to briefly illustrate some of the health issues that children and adolescents face. Young people represented a third of total participants in the STEAM study. While being trafficked, an important proportion of these children did experience very difficult living and working conditions. For instance, 3 in 5 children had no weekly rest day. An important number of children also experienced physical, sexual, emotional violence. And of course, in light of these experiences, it's not very surprising that children and adolescents reported on a range of physical complaints, but really the most striking data was the mental health symptoms observed. Almost 60% of children appeared to be suffering from depression and about a third from either anxiety or PTSD or both. Now, as I previously mentioned, health risks tend to accumulate in situations of trafficking, from pre-departure circumstances to the experience of exploitation itself. But it's also increasingly understood that victims continue to face a range of risks that affect their health once they've been removed from a situation of exploitation. So I will move to the next slide to illustrate this point. I will report on an analysis we conducted using that same STEAM data, using a slightly larger sample because we included children aged up to 19 years old. The majority of them were actually aged between 16 and 19. And we only looked at mental health outcome, depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder because they were so prevalent in the sample. And what we did, so I represented the model on this slide, is we used multivariable logistic regression models to see whether post-trafficking concerns or hopes and fears, which are on the left of the slide, left bubble, were associated with mental health symptoms, which are on the right side of the slide, all the while controlling for the effect of in-trafficking experiences, such as physical and psychological violence. Now, next slide, please. What this analysis can tell us for the purpose of today's discussion is, one, it can tell us whether adolescents continue to face health risks in post-trafficking settings, and that will impact their health status, and that has implication for post-trafficking interventions and services. And second, because today's webinar is about understanding how poverty impacts health through experiences of violence and trafficking, the analysis can also show us somehow how poverty continues to be a vulnerability factor throughout the trafficking cycle and beyond the exploitation phase, beyond the pre-departure circumstances, well into post-trafficking settings. So going to our first objective and the potential for ongoing harm in post-trafficking settings. Well, what did we find? We found that, so independent of the severity of the abused experience in trafficking, those post-trafficking concerns or fears were actually associated with mental health symptoms. 9 of these concerns were associated with anxiety, 7 were associated with depression, and 4 with PTSD, sorry. Just to give you one example, children who said they worry about how they will be treated by others when they return home had triple the odds of having depression symptoms. So this has very important implications in terms of intervention because it shows that mental health symptoms can result from a range of factors, not only from the trauma of the trafficking experience, which is very important and has been central to care delivery for survivors. But there's a whole other range of factors that need to be considered, you know. And moving to our point on poverty, if we zoom in on the data, those concerns most often cited by both boys and girls were actually economic in nature, as you can see on the left side of the slide. Okay, they were the most cited concerns, but were they actually associated with mental health symptoms? Well, it turns out that concerns about earning money increased the odds of anxiety among girls. Concerns about money issues in the family were associated with both anxiety and depression among girls, and hoping for money in the future was associated with odds of anxiety among boys. So there is strong indication that poverty could be a vulnerability factor throughout the trafficking cycle. And again, you need to address this properly in post-trafficking services, because if you don't address these concerns, you run the risk of children having long-term poor health, poor mental health, but also you increase their risk of further victimization and possibly of re-trafficking, because it's still the same concern about poverty that's going to affect their decision-making. And moving on to my last slide, I'll just briefly conclude on a couple lessons based on this study. Well, first of all, that it's very important to conceptualize the experience of trafficking as a cycle, and that harm continues in post-trafficking setting. It continues to affect health of survivors, and it really raises the risk of being victimized further beyond the exploitation. And so in that sense, post-trafficking services, they act as a crucial intervention point to break that cycle of victimization and to improve health outcomes for survivors. That not only refers to immediate care assistance services, but also follow-up care upon return to their countries, because that's generally the policy in the region. Survivors will tend to be returned. And finally, to really improve the quality and the impact of these services, we really need more research. We need more evidence generated on the very specific needs of survivors. For example, from the results I just presented to you, it kind of becomes clear that a psychosocial care approach that includes, livelihood strategies could be more efficient than, let's say, a trauma-informed approach only. You may very well need the trauma-informed approach, and it's very important, but it should be more holistic than that. Of course, I recognize doing research on trafficking is very complex, and that's why we lack a lot of evidence on a variety of experiences. But I think what's also central to generating better evidence is including survivors' voices, particularly of young people, and having a better understanding of how they perceive their own experiences of trafficking, own experiences of abuse, and the related needs that they think they have. And I think on that note, I will hand over to my fellow panelists.
Thank you so much, Mary, for your very comprehensive presentation, highlighting the trends, outcomes, and their impact on health and well-being of young migrants, and also highlighting the mental health issues during trafficking and post-trafficking stages. Those are very, very important. And your recommendations on holistic psychosocial approach are also very much appreciated. And we look forward to hearing more from you during the panel discussion. Thank you so much. Now it is my pleasure to invite our next speaker, Mr. Ken Haitha. He is currently working with Humanity and Inclusion in Thailand as Disability and Social Inclusion Project Officer, where he supports people with disabilities and their caregivers in 9 Burmese refugee camps along the Thai-Myanmar border. He is from Karen ethnic group from Eastern Myanmar. He spent his childhood on Thai-Myanmar border. He stayed in a Burmese refugee camp in Thailand, studied in a Burmese migrant school. Later, he completed his bachelor's studies in social sciences at Chiang Mai University in Thailand, and also a master's in human rights and conflict management from Italy. He will share his experiences as a young refugee and will also present his experiences of working with refugees and other vulnerable migrants in Thailand. Over to you, Mr. Haitha.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a privilege that I'm one of the speaker in this webinar. So today I'm going to look at this adolescent issue from the perspective of a migrant adolescent. And again, my name is Haitha, and I come from Myanmar, Eastern Myanmar. And today's presentation is going to be more informative and more like story-oriented presentation rather than analysis one. So I hope you get something from this presentation. So now you are looking at the picture of my village. So it's in Eastern Myanmar. And we are now talking about the year 2000. The year 2000 when there's no running water, there's no electricity, there's no infrastructure in this village. And this is a village of 50 to 70 households. And this is a village located in a black zone by the government. And meaning that there could be fighting happen anytime between the ethnic armed group and the military government. And grade 4 was the higher grade in this village. So that's when and why my story started. So at the age of 9, I moved from this village to Thai-Myanmar border, seeking for a better education opportunity. And it took me 2 days from my village to the border to walk. Again, we are talking about 2000, the year 2000, and there's no infrastructure. And the only way that we can cross the border through walking. And sometimes we take nighttime to walk. Why? Because it's really risky to be seen by the military or to be seen by the soldiers who patrol the border. So what we have to do is sometimes we need to take time at nighttime and cross the border. So again, from the border to my destination, it took another day. So totally, it took 3 days, and I do like this for a total of 9 years. And we need to look at why people, especially at the very young age, adolescent from one country move to another country. So of course, there are poverty. Behind the poverty, there are education opportunity, healthcare opportunity, and especially talking about Myanmar, it is about political instability because we are one of the world's longest civil war in Myanmar. That's why many adolescents at a very young age, like me at the age of 9, move from the village to other country for better opportunity. So now you are looking at a picture of one of the 9 Burmese refugee camp in Thai-Myanmar border. It's in Thai side, and this is where I spent my 4 years in this camp. And this is where not just me, but also many other refugees, migrant adolescents spend their time in here. The reason I'm sharing my story is not because it is unique or special, but because it is not unique and special, and it happened to many migrant adolescents. So yes, 4 years I spent my time in this crowded refugee camp, and then I got a chance to get out of the camp and then move to migrant school when I realized that adolescent migrant face a lot of health impact. For example, like physical impact, like we live in poor conditions, and we have very basic needs. For example, like medicine, shelter, food. Some of the audiences here also may know that, sometimes we have to sleep ourselves in order to forget about hunger, because at night time you feel really hungry, but you don't have food to eat, right? So you try to sleep so that you forgot about the hunger for a while. So in the morning you are you feel hungry again. Yeah, this is how we feel. Not just me, but many refugees, many migrant adolescents go through the same thing. And another thing, I came to realize that adolescent migrant really depends mainly on the NGO-CBO support from the service of NGO-CBO, especially when it comes to healthcare, because we just pray that we don't get sick, or we don't get sick severely, badly, so that we don't have to go to hospital, we don't have to go to clinics, because living in another country illegally and be a migrant or be a refugee, it's really hard to get access to healthcare. And also another reason why many adolescent migrants don't want to get access to a healthcare facility, because there's a fear inside our head. There's a fear inside us that if we present ourselves to the hospital or to the clinic, be illegal, we probably can get arrested, or we probably can get deported. Now, this kind of feeling, especially if you are somebody who have a migrant background or have a refugee background, you may have this feeling. And also another thing we need to look at this age, this is the time where you need to develop your social diplomat, and you need to grab your education opportunity. But many of these individual migrant adolescents see themselves in a very low self-esteem, or don't see themselves as a dignified life. Like me, there are also many other migrant adolescents that come into another country without guardian, without parents. So it is really hard to just manage everything on your own. And also, even those who come with their parent or guardian, it will be really hard because they have to follow their parent, they have to follow their guardians, because their parents have to follow the jobs. So they cannot create long relationship with their friends, their family, their relatives. So it's really disturb their social development. And even those who have a chance to study at a university, be illegal before, there's a feeling that you don't really want to reveal who you really are, who you come from, because you are afraid of being judged, be discriminated. So this is things that really disturb migrant or refugees, adolescents. Drop-off rate also very high among this group of people, because they have to help their younger siblings, or they have to help their parents for work. And even those who are lucky enough to make it into the university, it is really hard for them to find a job even after the graduation, because they don't feel belong to the country where they come from, and also they don't have legally full right to also work in a foreign country where they are in. So it's really disturbing there. And like our first presenter said, mental health is also a really big issue, especially by being illegal adolescent in another country. you are being restricted to travel, and you are thinking about getting jobs. And also on top of that, there is a discrimination against you. And also there are some double standard policy that impose on you because since you're another citizen, so you may face this double standard policy. And also from my experience, I have seen few cases, especially in the refugee camp, where adolescents try to commit suicide because they don't believe that there's a future for them. And they don't believe that they could whether go back to where their parents come from or integrate into the country where they are live in or move to another country through resettlement. Everything is uncertain for them. So yeah, it really affects their mental health. And now even with COVID-19 happening and it affecting people globally, especially now for the migrant people, it is migrant people, especially adolescent, it's really, really difficult because now the people, most of the people talk about vaccine, get it protection, get it care for the government, but be adolescent, be illegal migrant adolescent in the foreign country, it is really hard to hope for such thing from anybody apart from NGO CBO who provide free service for them. And just recently, I have a friend who just called me and said, I have relatives who need a phone. I asked why, because she said, because there is nowadays people use online platform to study, right? So people need a phone or computer to study, but there are many migrant adolescent or migrant children who don't have that privilege, who don't have that opportunity to study online. So it really causes stress for them. So this is what really, really need to be addressed. I think mental health is a big issue. So I personally do believe that mental health and psychosocial support is really needed to be addressed among migrant adolescent. And now I'm just showing you some of my photo with my friend in 2012. I studied in Chima University, and 2019 I was studying in Italy. So this may see as a successful story among many migrant adolescent, but there are many other migrant adolescents who cannot climb up this ladder up to the top because they face a lot of health issue, or they face a lot of difficulties, and especially because they face a lot of mental issue in these days. And this is me working with Burma Children Medical Fund. Like I said before, many migrant adolescents rely heavily on the NGO CBO along Thailand Myanmar border, and this we can also apply in many other parts of the borders in the world, where adolescents only rely on the NGO CBO support because this is free and this is the only way then they can get service from. So I want to end this presentation with some recommendation. Since I talked a lot about the migrant and the adolescent, so I was thinking it would be good that in the home country, if the government or the ruling, the leaders of the government can create jobs, education, and healthcare, and even create awareness about the adolescent and their right. This could stop some young adolescents from going out of their country and go to another country illegally to seek for a better opportunity. At the same time, it is also crucially important that we have some policy or laws for migrant or refugees adolescents in the host country so that they can get basic healthcare, they can get basic education, so that they can learn the language when they live in, and they can stand on their own. You have to rely on other people. And also, it is also very important that the government of a given country work very closely with migrant agency or refugee-based agency, because these agencies know about the needs of the refugees or migrant adolescents. So it is really good that some policymaker can take this into consideration, and even not just give work with them, but also grant some right for these agencies to work freely. And I just want to point out about the durable solution, because in the camp, adolescents are feeling overwhelmed by not being able to return to the country where their parents from, by not able to repatriate to resettle to another country, or by not being able to integrate into the country when they live in. So it's really caused a mental health problem for them. So if the host country or any host country in the world can guarantee something for these young adolescents in the camp, so that they can have some right when they get older, they can get jobs, and they can get good and quality education. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Haitha, for joining and sharing your very moving first-hand experiences of a refugee life, and also highlighting all the sufferings, hardships, and challenges faced by young people who are migrants and affected by the conflict and violence. Your very comprehensive and practical recommendations for home countries and host countries are also very much appreciated. We also highly appreciate your efforts of continuing your education despite all the challenges, receiving international education, and supporting the young migrant workers again in the communities. Your life is a role model for many migrant young people, and it will show a way to many young people for their meaningful engagement in the issues affecting their lives. So it's helping them for achieving their full potential. Thank you so much, and thanks once again. We will have more discussion in the live's next section when we have the panel discussion. Now I would like to invite our next speaker, Ms. Bunla Chantafuma. She is the Director General for Protection and Counseling Center for Women and Children at the Lao Women's Union in Lao PDR. This center was established in 2006. It provides free and confidential psychosocial counseling services and comprehensive assistance to women and children. These services include safe shelter, legal counseling, medical assistance, vocational training, and reintegration support to women and children survivors of trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual exploitation. This center also represents women and children survivors of human trafficking and violence in the prosecution process and assist them to access justice. Ms. Bunla will present the work which is being done in Lao PDR comprehensively on protection of women and girl survivors of violence against women, establishing referral pathways and experiences at the Protection Center, where UNFPA and Lao Women's Union are working together. Over to you, Ms. Bunla, for your presentation.
Thank you very much for your for inviting Ms. Bunla Chantafuma to join this event. Could you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, and first of all, I would like to apologize that Ms. Bunla Chantafuma cannot participate in this event because she has on the meeting for election. So she requested me to join this event, First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Sudalak Punsawat. I am Deputy Director of the Counseling and Protection Center for Women and Children, La Women's Union. And dear all panelists, I think you may know well that La Women's Union is a mass organization which represent the rights and benefits for Lao women and children in order to implement the government policy, constitution, laws, and legislation in protecting legitimate rights and benefits of women. Lao Women's Union, we have the organization from central to village level. This means that we can coordinate with Lao Women's Union at all levels. The Counseling and Protection Center for Women and Children is one department under the Lao Women's Union and officially opened in 2006, which is the first shelter in Laos that provides comprehensive assistance for women and children, especially for the women and children who face of domestic violence, trafficking, and sexual exploitation, as well as women and children who have problems in their family and society. Yes, the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, the next one. Yeah. In order to implement in terms of protecting the rights and benefits of Lao Women's Union, of Lao women in the society, the counseling center also, as well as the Lao Women's Union, we have to implement the policies, laws, or related legislation that related to protect the rights and benefits of Lao women. For example, in the Constitution in the year 2015, Article 7, that mentioned about the obligation of the mass organization, especially the Lao Women's Union, have responsible to protect the rights and benefits of the Lao women as a whole countries. And then next, after the Constitution, we have to implement the law on development and protection of women. This law is implemented from the CEDAW that La PDR ratified in 1981. And then we have the law on combating and preventing violence against women and children in 2014. In order to guarantee the right of the victim of anti-trafficking, and also in order to prosecution to the offender of anti-trafficking, the National Assembly has approved the law on anti-trafficking in person in 2019. And also in order to guarantee that people, especially Lao citizens, especially Lao women, can access to the legal support, the government has improved the decree on legal assistance in 2018 and law, and as well as we have the Lao Women Development Plan, and also the government also approved the second 5-year National Action Plan on combating violence against women, or the strategy or the plan that we have to implement in order to prevent violence against women in the Lao PDR. Next slide, please. And we go to the function or the role of the counseling center related to, in order to protect the victim or protect the women and children who have the problems in the society. The counseling center, we have the role to provide the counseling for women and children who have the problem in the family and society in 3 types. One, we provide legal assistance is for free, and psychology and mental health. And we also receive report case of human trafficking and domestic violence. By doing this, we also receive the record by enhanced and by through the hotline number, because now we have the hotline number in the number 1362 that can run in 24 hours. This number that we have to thanks to the UNFPA that provide the technical and also the fund to the in running this project. Next slide, please. Yes. Next slide, please. Oh, what happened? Besides that, the counseling center and also provide the support to the victim of domestic violence, trafficking in person, and sexual exploitation. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm not sure what happened. Yes, this is the accommodation, the safe shelter that we provide to the victim of to the women and children who stay in the shelter. We provide safe accommodation, provide food, clothes, and other basic needs for the survivors or the victim. Next slide, please. And we also provide legal aid by assist women and children get access to justice, receive report, complaint from women and children who have the problem in the family and society, provide legal counseling, legal advice, represent women and children in the prosecution process, and also coordinate with stakeholders to assist the survivor in the judicial process and follow up on the ongoing cases. Next slide, please. The third one, we also provide the medical care for the victim during their stay at the shelter by provide free medical checkup and treatment medical condition. And by doing this, we have to coordinate with the hospital or health sector to provide the treatment for them, because in the shelter we don't have the doctor. We cannot provide medical checkup by ourselves. We have to coordinate with to the hospital. Next slide, please. Besides that, we also provide education and vocational training to the survivors or the victim. But for doing this, we have to coordinate with concerned agency, especially education sector, in order to provide the training or educational for survivors, coordinate with concerned agency for job recruitment for the victims, and find seed fund for survivors in order to settle the new life for them. The next one, we also provide economic support to the survivors by provide financial support, access, and give the advice for them for accessing to loan or fund or job replacement opportunity to earn and generate income to support their family. The last one, after we provide the vocational training, after we provide economic support to them, we have to repatriate them to the society. But before we repatriate them to the society or back to the family, we have to do family tracing and assessment. After that, we sending them to the home country by coordinate with concerned agency or concerned authority in local terms. Next slide, please. This is the statistic that we provide the counseling service to women and children to the society in the society. But you can see that we are not only provide the counseling to the women and children, but we also provide counseling to male. Sometimes there are the couple, and sometimes we have to provide the counseling like a group or like a couple in order to make understand in the same page. And we can see that the number of the service that we provide by face-to-face and telephone counseling. In terms of victim assistance, we also provide the assistance to human trafficking, vulnerable group, domestic violence, and sexual exploitation. As you can see from the slide, you can see that since 2016 and to 2020, we can provide the support more than 400 people that they have to stay in the shelter. But you can see that the number of the victim or the survivor of domestic violence compared to the human trafficking is quite low because of we have limited budget to support. Next slide, please. Now we have the counseling network in 18 provinces, 148 districts now. Means that we have the counseling network throughout the country. Next slide, please. In terms of referral, the referral pathway, in terms of providing assistance to the victim of domestic violence, we have to coordinate with concerned agency. For example, police, courts, justice, health, education, and labor social welfare, and other concerned sectors, including CSO, NGO, including UN agency as well. Yes, next please. The challenge that and from the by doing this, we have to coordinate with concerned agency, especially UNFPA. They provide much support to La Women Union, especially for provide setting up the new shelter in Savannakhet and provide the humanitarian response for the Atapu province and provide the dignity kit for the migrant worker that returned from Thailand who stay in the quarantine center as well as in the shelter. But for implementing in this work, we also limited many kind. For example, limited fund, limited number of shelter, limited number of competency human resource, especially in counseling service. And the understanding of the concerned agency in terms of protecting the victim is quite low compared to our work that we have to do. Next slide, please. This is the second 5-year national plan on combating violence against women that we have to implement, especially in Object 2 that related to survival of GBV, and we have to coordinate, we have to develop the new SOP on social terms and referral pathway by supporting from the UNFPA. And this National Action Plan, UNFPA is the key partner to support both in technical and budget to develop this National Action Plan, and thank you for that. Next, please. Yeah, I think it is there all for my presentation related to the time that I have to present. Thank you, Ted, for your give me a chance to present this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sudalak, for replacing Madam Bunlua and presenting the comprehensive work which Lao Women's Union is leading in Lao PDR for creating a conducive policy and programmatic environment, strengthening the services, and also highlighting the joint efforts of UNFPA and Lao Women's Union for protection of women and girls who are survivors of violence against women. I would also like to congratulate the government of Lao PDR and Lao Women's Union for creating such a conducive policy and legal environment, which is on very high scale in the region. So thank you so much. We will have more discussion when we have more discussion. Now we are running out of time, but we will still use some time for our questions. So maybe I would like to go to the first question to Mary. Mary, you highlighted the trends and also the impact. Now this is the critical time when the COVID-19 is affecting the budgets of all the governments. What is your suggestion that in this situation, how these issues can be addressed in a comprehensive manner and the present progress does not get reversed?
Sorry, I'm muting myself. Yeah, that's a very big question. Well, I mean, poverty is a big area. If I see the situation for human trafficking, definitely it's the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely increased vulnerabilities to trafficking, economic shocks, high rates of unemployment, school closures, which are critical for young people. And even identifying victims is becoming very difficult. Providing care is becoming difficult because of lockdowns, because of border closures. So I think, if you want to address these issues, I think first and foremost, what you need is kind of like quickly generate, information and evidence on, how COVID-19 is, creating vulnerabilities to trafficking, because the pandemic has also changed some of the trends that we had observed. It might affect different population groups that were not affected before. The trafficking pathways might have changed. You might have more domestic trafficking rather than international trafficking. You can have changes in the modus operandi of traffickers. So you really need an updated response, and this response needs to be quite flexible and quick, And I realize that saying like doing research and generating evidence when you have little money is not very motivating. But it's actually very important when you have constrained resources to understand exactly what these vulnerabilities are, to adapt your response, and then that's how you can, adapt your national strategies, your national plans, allocate roles and responsibilities between different agencies, avoiding overlaps. You can also develop prevention strategies accordingly, and you can also strengthen, your legal frameworks to include new forms of trafficking that, have developed during the pandemic. I'm thinking, this hasn't been developed during the pandemic, but I'm thinking like, online child sexual exploitation. That's sort of a new form of sexual exploitation and trafficking of children, but that's not very regulated yet because it's not been defined properly, for example. So all these are, issues that I think rely on more evidence.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary. And now we are almost at the end of the 1 hour. So I think we can quickly, can I request Mr. Heta, just briefly, very briefly share about how to effectively engage adolescents and young people in planning the response and prevention programs.
Thank you very much for the question. Well, as a former migrant adolescent, I think since I come from education-based background, so I was thinking education could be the one of a few solutions. So education could be the solution to it in order to empower the adolescent from poverty, trafficking, and violence. And with education, it can create the confidence, their confidence. And also with confidence, they will know how to protect themselves from such the risk that we just mentioned about. And I also think that maybe education alone is not enough, because we also need to look at the foundation of adolescents as well. If they got good support from their guardian, their parents, even the state, the government, it will be really good to make this adolescent to become a better, decent individual in their adulthood. And I also think that when we look at, because we are talking about the trafficking as well, so we also need to look at the other end, meaning that we need to look at what are the causes of trafficking and violence as well. So it will be good that if the government or the ruler implement some policy on preventing or causing more perpetrators of the trafficking of violence. Maybe the perpetrator can be older sibling or parents, guardian, or even the government, the state themselves. So yeah, they need to review their policy, I guess. And this can also reduce the trafficking and the violence toward the adolescent. And I think another thing is that since we also talk a lot about mental health problem. So if adolescent is mentally strong, he or she can protect him or herself from trafficking, poverty, and violence, right? So I was thinking, even the knowledge of MHPS as mental health and psychosocial support, if there's integration in some education curriculum or maybe in some activity, it will be really, really good. And also, I think that, yeah, to become a good adult, they are right. The adolescent right must be respected, protected, and fulfilled by the guardians, and also the state. And let me just add a little bit that I think adolescents themselves have the right to involve in some decision-making program, because especially now we are talking about this region of Southeast Asia where adolescents' voices are not being heard, even though they will be heard, but they are not being integrated into some policy making mechanism, turn into a policy. So it will be really good if some of the voice from adolescents themselves are being integrated into some policy and turn it into the policy. And also, I think things like a virtual webinar like this will really be a good way of promoting the rights and the issue of adolescents as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hatha, for very practical and very useful suggestions. The discussion is very interesting. So I think we can go on for very long, but we don't have much time. Thank you so much for this. We will probably have more discussions and definitely more sharings we will plan. Now I would like to request Madam Sujalak. The Lao PDR has created very conducive this policy environment. What is your advice for other countries in the region? Very briefly, if you would like to provide some suggestion and advice for other countries.
Yes, if we talking about the violence against women, even though in Lao PDR we have the comprehensive law, but in the pre-implement law is the challenge for us, because the understanding of the law enforcement is the key part. that we have to continue to let them know or understand how to implement. And the second one, we need to receive the support, including technical support or financial support, how to assist the victim of violence against women, and also how do we strengthen the capacity building for the service providers, or including the justice or the law enforcement, how to implement in terms of violence against women in Laos, and especially how to implement national action plan that we have in Laos. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Sudalak, for your suggestions. And I would like to thank once again Mary, Aitha, and Ms. Sudalak for your very useful and very comprehensive presentations, and apologies for going over time. Now I would like to hand over to Ms. Mariam for her closing remarks. Mariam, over to you.
Always fascinating to hear such a well-presented description of what's going on with adolescent health and well-being, what sort of suggestions and recommendations and research are being done. So a big thanks to the speakers. My sincere appreciation to the Singapore Duke University team. It's been a real pleasure for UNFPA Laos to collaborate with you and to use this academic platform to go and reach the broader region with some of the experiences of Laos. And in each of the webinars, we heard not just from the Lao colleagues on the adolescent work that is being done. It's a growing body of knowledge. And what we see from all the diversity of speakers, including today's, that body of knowledge, the recommendations that are coming through, they're consistent and they all point in the same direction. If we want to break the cycle of poverty, the cycle of violence, the cycle of early marriages or teenage pregnancies, investing in adolescent mental health, physical well-being, general emotional, social growth is indispensable, be that in the development setting or be that in a crisis situation. So thank you to all the speakers today. Thank you to the Singapore Health University for giving us this platform to showcase the fantastic innovations that are happening in Laos through the NOI framework. And you see the image of the little NOI in the SDG logo just on my screensaver also. The government of Laos has done amazing work on comprehensive sexuality education rollout, on bodily autonomy framework and policies for indicator of the Sustainable Development Goal 5.6.2. There's amazing work on the attention that is drawn to early marriage and teenage pregnancy and the rolling out of youth-friendly services. The solutions are known to us. I think it's a question of scaling them up, advocating for funding to protect the advances made so that COVID-19 does not disrupt essential health services and progress made for the well-being of young people. I will say Kop Chai Lai Lai to everyone that joined us, not just today, but to all 4 webinars. And I look forward to engaging with a lot of people who reached out thanks to these webinars. So Amina, over to you. Thank you again on behalf of UNFPA Laos, the UNFPA Regional Office, and all the Lao government partners and CSOs that spoke today. Bye from me.
Thank you, Mariam, and I echo back the thanks. I'll start with, of course, the thanks to the panelists of today, the panelists of all the 4 sessions that we had, the audience that was there, and of course, our partners in organizing this, UNFPA Lao. It has been an absolute pleasure to work with you. I think, when we started the webinar series, we mentioned that we felt this was an area that needed a little bit of spotlight on it. the focus on adolescents in particular, as a particular demographic. We've seen the many different aspects highlighted, and we don't have time to go over this, but I think anyone can, who's been following will know that we touched on really important things. Some very emotional topics also were touched on. I particularly appreciate our young speakers of today to kind of bring forward that voice. It was great to hear from you. And I'll also echo Mariam's comment that we hope that this is not just a kind of a one-off or a four-off discussion, 4 afternoons, but really an ongoing dialogue to see how we can collectively work in both academia, in the very practical world that UNFPA and the ministries work, in other ways that we can collaborate across the region. As you saw in all these 4 webinars, UNFPA's strong support of the government of Laos in so many different areas, and also UNFPA in other countries and other partners that we kind of try to highlight. Of course, that was just a tip of the iceberg. There's so many more. So we hope that these opportunities are there to link and to further work. So I really hope this is just a starting point, and we will say bye in a second, but it's a start of a journey, not the end. So thank you all for the audience. And I'll just also like to say thank you. So usually I don't have time, but I really want to take this time to say thank you to our team and to the UNFPA team. From our team, we have Shreya, Hema, and Alad, who's worked so much on the content of these webinars. They've kind of supported in the identification of the speakers, in putting the questions together, in really organizing how they should be run. On the logistics side, we have Mariel, who's like a star organizer, and we have Simone helping us with the communications. And I know from UNFPA side, you had a whole team of communications behind it. And Tej, of course, your leadership, and Mariam, your guidance through this has been just wonderful. So thank you all very much, and hope to be in touch and see you all again soon.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mariam, and thanks, Amina, for your encouraging.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Yeah.
Bye.